Hello, everybody. My name is Bob Kosciugnano. Here with my co-host, Derek Shawman. And this is
Hello.
the inaugural episode of HazChat from Hazmat 101 Consultants. This is a little different than Spotlight. Spotlight episodes, we try to spotlight incidents or departments, hazmat teams, and so forth. This one's a little different. This is just one of us is old. That would be me. Hazmat guys just chatting about hazmat stuff. So welcome, and this will be a monthly episode that you will find on our YouTube channel at Hazmat 101 Consultants. And as we get started, today's topic is we're going to talk about incident commander and do they have to be a hazmat tech or not? And if not, maybe what can they do or should do to make themselves better prepared? And this topic was picked because my good friend and co-host there, Derek Shawman, just got promoted to District Chief of the City of Orlando Fire Department and has been a hazmat technician for many, many years. So now that he's in that role, he looks at things a little differently. And before we get started, I just want to say a couple things for me is when I got promoted up to lieutenant, I wasn't fortunate enough to get all the way to the rank of district chief before I retired. I will honestly say, Derek, and I think you will agree, that being a hazmat tech before I was lieutenant made me look at fires and scenes a little differently when I did finally ride that right seat of the rig.
Oh, definitely. I think that just the process of being a hazmat technician, and we start to size things up a little bit differently. It's not that fire-oriented people don't have the same abilities to do things, but I think that hazmat challenges us to look at things a little bit differently and to consider things from different angles, and that can help you out on any type of incident. So whether it's because you're a hazmat technician or you're someone who just really studies incident philosophy and different ways of looking at it, I think that being a hazmat tech really helped out in that aspect.
So before we get on like OSHA and all the other stuff, your first 3 or 4 shifts as a district chief, you had like a hazmat call every shift, weren't they? Now, you were actually put in a district where you have 2 hazmat truck companies that are under your command, not for hazmat, but truck companies in your district. They just happen to be hazmat because that area has the most real hazmat calls in the city. So you've had a few jobs, as they say, related to hazmat within your first 3 weeks.
Yeah, I've been fortunate to have a nice diverse collection of responses, but hazmat has definitely played a role in those, in addition to the fires and extrications and shootings and everything else.
Good old American street violence.
The hazmat has been something that, oddly enough, seemed to start right about the same time that I got the position.
But being a district chief, though, and having that hazmat background, I mean, that definitely helped you with those calls. I mean, we can't talk about some of the calls right now for different, legality reasons, but that helped you, right?
Oh, definitely. It helped me to better understand and anticipate how I could support my hazmat crews that were actually handling the incident. So I had to take a moment and realize that, my job is not to formulate the full plan and to direct everything. My job was to anticipate their needs and monitor what they have going on, and if they had any need for me as a resource, I was there available, but really allowing them to do their job while also making sure that I was informed as to what was going on.
Yeah, I was a hands-on guy myself, so it's hard to just sit back and let other people formulate the plans. But so when we look at this, we start talking, we're not going to get down in the weeds of the OSHA regulations and stuff like that, but the incident commander really needs to be operations level, and that's pretty much it. With obviously the annual required training. But you said now with the new 470, there's a little more direction. Can you go into that a little bit?
Well, 470, which addresses the standards for competencies and the professional standards also, recognizes that the hazmat incident commander needs to complete all the requirements for awareness level and operations level. And in addition to that, needs to satisfy the competencies of Chapter 12 and the professional standards listed in Chapter 13 of NFPA 470, which are very basic. It's, the ability to interpret information, to analyze the incident. They need to have an understanding of PPE selection criteria and use, decontamination options. They need to understand how to formulate an incident action plan and understand the termination processes. So there is more than just operations level that is expected for people who take that incident command role. But as far as their training for the functional portion, the hands-on portion of hazmat, they would be operational level. The rest of it is more of an understanding of the overall incident structure.
And we've both had the chief pull up on the scene, not the fire chief, but a chief, who says, I used to be on hazmat, 50, 100 years ago, whatever. But for the most part, a lot of the chiefs just got their hands off. I know the answer, but some may not know the answer. Who is ultimately responsible on a hazmat scene?
So there is a little bit of gray area there, but when you really look at it, it would be the senior hazmat technician. They're the ones who should be calling the shots. They have the most experience, the highest level of training and competency. That's the expectation, that the most senior person would have that. So essentially, they're the ones who should be running that operation. And that's also why in an ICS system, your incident commander can also delegate the operation out to a hazmat group leader. It doesn't have to be the incident commander trying to juggle all the resources and expectations for the incident. They're there as a liaison and support function a lot of times, where usually you will have a technician who's steering exactly what's going to be done, and it's just making sure that everyone on the scene's informed and that no one likes surprises. Everyone wants to know what's going on.
Right. Yeah, and one of the things that has really, I guess, bothered me is that, we've had chiefs that would show up to training and sign a roster and leave. And I'm not saying our department, there's other departments that I'm sure it's the same thing, or they don't really participate as much as they should. And then especially with the hazmat ops review class, we go around and teach around the country, it's very rare that chiefs show up to that class. And really, if anybody needs it, it's them. We're going over meters and stuff in that class for that first arriving engine company, truck company, whatever the unit is. But it's also, in my opinion, the time when the chief should be in there too, because it's geared towards them. And instead of just clicking a mouse, and that's a class that Derek and I are going to be, and you're hearing it first right here, clicks versus competency, a new class coming from Hazmat 101 Consultants at your next conference and more. But that's what it is. It's people are clicking on stuff instead of being competent at things. And I think we're, just because you got a couple of these on your collar doesn't mean, that's it. You got to rely on your people. And honestly, if it were me, I would want to know what my people are doing.
Exactly. That's one of the pitfalls we have with special operations is a lot of agencies tend to look at special operations as it's those guys. Those guys do that thing, whether it's hazmat, confined space, high angle. If the incident commander or the ranking officer on scene does not have experience in that background, they have two options. They can continue to not understand and rely 100% on their competent people and just provide support, which is 100% a viable option. But they also have the opportunity to seek out additional training and education so that they can assume a more active incident command role versus a support and liaison role, which, if they don't have that knowledge, really should be what they're doing.
Right. Yeah, and there's classes out there, and I totally recommend people going out and seeking those incident command classes. Um, you need to look at it as to you are doing what needs to be done to keep your people safe. And that's the bottom line. You always hear people say, everybody goes home, that whole adage that, different groups say and whatnot. But it's true. You want to make sure everybody gets home safe the next day, that night, morning, however your department works their tours. But again, I'm the type of guy that I want to know what's going on. I want to be in the know, So, that brings us to another part of the puzzle is what's your thoughts on, we kind of did an officers academy for lieutenants and above. It's a quarterly thing. You guys can try it yourselves if you want. But basically, it was different topics each quarter. One might be special ops for a little bit, was gone over dive, high angle, hazmat. Another one might be MCI, what have you. But I think as a new company officer and chief officer, that should be a mandatory, at a minimum, 3-hour class that they go through.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think that's also important to make sure that those chief officers, those people who might assume those roles, are included in training. They don't have to attend every training operation, but the reality is they don't know what they don't know.
Right.
So until they've seen the cogs of the wheel turning and see all the little intricacies that are happening on a scene, they might think, oh, the crew has it handled. I don't really need to do anything. And they don't necessarily know, like, oh, no, we also need an engine company for decon. And if this operation is going to be an extended operation, we're going to need another engine company to come in to relieve that engine company that's doing decon because they're going to be fatigued. Right. And it can very quickly become a manpower and resource intensive operation. And the incident commander, really their job is to anticipate and support that demand, those demands for additional resources, the demands for additional equipment. Really, that's where they shine in taking a lot of burden off of the hazmat officer and the hazmat safety officer by not necessarily trying to dictate how the incident is run, but more getting ahead of the game and anticipating those needs for additional personnel, additional equipment, and communicating back and forth with the hazmat group to make sure that all their needs are being met and to be able to get their operation handled as efficiently as possible.
And for those of you listening or watching, Derek brought up a good point. Invite your chiefs to your training. One of today's date, by the way, is June 5th. Derek and I will be leaving in a couple of days to head to Baltimore for the Baltimore Hazmat Conference. And we're fortunate enough to be asked to be the closing session, which is the politics of hazmat. And we have a slide in there that's, when your chief sees this or you tell them what you're doing, they're thinking that. It's a flare-off, but they're thinking a big explosion. So kind of what comes into play there is, hey, have them come to your training so they can see what it is you're doing. They can understand, like Derek was saying, how things work, and then maybe have a little group discussion afterwards. Hey, this is why we do it. So now they have a better understanding. Hey, when they're doing this or they're asking for whatever, it's making a little bit more sense. And now I get it.
And that really opens their eyes to why. I think everyone's had it, whether it was on a hazmat call, an MCI, or a fire call, that sometimes you feel like the chief isn't giving you enough time to accomplish your mission before asking you for an update.
Yeah.
And while you do maybe have some people who are in command that are impatient, a lot of times it's because that dead time, it feels like a very long time. So the more that we can give them information and feed them information, the less they're feeling like, I need to check in, I need to find out what's going on. But having them included in those trainings, they get to see, okay, well, it takes this long for them to dress out in this equipment and for these
Yeah.
meters to be up and ready to go. Like it's not
like going into a
like
fire.
your typical it's not come off the truck fully bunked out, throw on your mask, pull a hose line and make entry. It's
Right.
a little bit slower. Obviously, we've always said that we think that hazmat shouldn't be a slowdown operation.
Right.
It should still be moving with some forward momentum.
Yeah,
but
don't
the
use
reality
the pump
is
the brakes part, guys and gals. We don't pump the brakes. Okay, we
yeah.
might tap the brakes. Let's get that straight.
The reality is it is going to take longer to get the operation going, and it's going to most likely be an extended operation.
Right.
And having someone that can work with that incident commander to explain to them what's going on so that they're not wondering why they haven't heard any updates recently is a huge benefit. But really having them involved in that training so that they understand what the realistic time benchmarks would be, that's worth more than even having that liaison there, because now they have confidence that the information they're receiving is timely.
Right. And one last thing before we wrap it up is that I see and hear so many chief officers, popping by a firehouse wanting to talk fire tactics, which is great. I got no problem with it whatsoever. But let's pop in and do some hazmat tactics. Let's pop in and do some things that we don't run a lot of, because we train so much on EMS, but that's 80% of the calls, and then the next percentage of the calls is fires and extrications and stuff, and we're always training on that stuff because it's the cool stuff, right? But we need to get in there and just, even if it's a round table discussion on a hazmat run, and pretty much anything could be a hazmat run. I think the chief officers need to get more involved in starting those conversations and let it play out around our kitchen table. And if you, as the chief officer, feel uncomfortable doing that, just plant the seed with the lieutenant and go, hey, I'm going to pop in, and once you guys do this, I'm just going to kind of sit back, and this way you're not embarrassing yourself if that's what is the deal. Which I've found a lot of people don't want to bring stuff up because they're afraid they will be exposed. You know what? You don't have to be exposed. You can still learn a lot by what goes on in the discussion around the table. So
show an interest in what's going on. And one of the big things is, we talked about that technically the incident commander does not need to be a technician. They can be operations level. The thing that we have to remember with that, though, is operations level, were they competently and adequately trained to the operations level?
Right.
So take the time, spend time with your team, and find out that maybe your operations level wasn't meeting the current 470 standard. Maybe you didn't actually receive PPE education or education on detection equipment or decontamination procedures, because that is what you're supposed to actually receive at the operations level. But depending on how long ago you became operations level,
right,
how much you've maintained your competency, it may be worth, you need to spend some time with the team. And I would encourage anyone who's going to be in that role, go take the technician class. It's going to open your eyes to a lot of what your team's doing. And, we take all sorts of classes at the command level. Hazmat technician could be one, and your other special operations, at least take an operations level class for rope rescue or confined space. You don't necessarily have to be a technician, but you should have a fundamental knowledge of what your teams are doing if you're going to be assuming command of those incidents. Even
right.
if you have that liaison, you still want to be in the know, because ultimately there is liability there for the incident commander, and you don't want to find yourself in a position of saying, well, I didn't know that.
Yeah, because that's not a defense.
No.
and they will tell you that when you're sitting on the stand, because ultimately that's what's going to happen. So Anyway, well, thank you, my friend and co-host. I hope everybody got something out of this before we leave. Just a couple quick websites for you to check out. The Hazmat Guys Facebook page and website, the Hazmat Guys Roundtable, first Tuesday of every month at 8 p.m. Eastern. Bobby, Mike, myself, and Jeff Seintek do a live show, the Hazmat Guys Roundtable on YouTube. Hazmat Group 2, Hazmat Group, and Common Sense are some of the other ones that we do. So, Derek, thanks again. And everybody, please stand by, because you will find another episode next month of Hazmat 101 Consultants HazChat. Stay safe, and See you next time.